This is activity 1, which one doesn't belong? And so you're going to look at some diagrams. This is from lesson 1, moving in the plane. And the key word here is moving. So we're going to look at movement through a plane as we look at these diagrams. And these are diagrams of different angles. So what does an angle mean? How does it move? How is it measured? And this is from Unit 1, rigid transformations and congruence. This is the very first lesson of 8th grade. So which one doesn't belong? So you have 4 figures here. There's a long ray and there's a shorter ray coming off of this point. And so if you look at these, you begin to see some angles that you've seen in the past. You think of some words to describe those angles, and you might come up with, well, first of all, let's layer each of these angles on top of a circle. And I'm having the larger ray trace the circle. It's not quite right. It's really the smaller ray that moves. I'm going to show you that a little bit later, the way that I set this up. So what I want to do so that you can look at them is put them all on an axis. So you can call this the x-axis, and I'm going to line up this longer ray with the x-axis in each case. So as I line up the longer ray with the x-axis, 90-degree angle, this becomes the y-axis. And you can think of this smaller ray as turning through the plane around this point in a coordinate plane in an x and y axis. And so if it turns 180 degrees, it goes halfway around. That's called a straight angle. So it forms a straight line called a straight angle. If it goes more than 90 degrees but less than that 180 degrees, that is called an obtuse angle. So this is an obtuse angle right here. I'm going to show you the idea of turning in just a moment. If it goes 270 degrees around, so 3 times 90 is 270, or 90 degrees this way. So now we can start talking about moving in a counterclockwise direction or moving in a clockwise direction. I have a little bit more to say about that, but that would be a right angle or a 90-degree angle. And then if it moves less than 90 degrees, and this is less than 90 degrees clockwise, that is called an acute angle. So let's put some numbers to these angles. So you can call this a 180-degree angle, and it's also a negative 180 degrees if you want to go the other direction. So if you want to go counterclockwise, call it 180 degrees. If you want to go clockwise, call it a negative 180 degrees. And if you go that 90 degrees plus, and you just have to guess at this, just take a look and make your best guess. This is 45 degrees. So this is less than 45 degrees, which would be 135 degrees. And so I'm just going to say that this is about 15 degrees less. Half of 45 is 22.5. And these aren't exact. Right now we're not using a protractor. We're not getting exact measurements. So call this 120-degree angle, a turn of 120 degrees. And that is an obtuse angle. Once again, if this one turns 270 degrees, it's also, you can think of it as turning 90 degrees clockwise or a negative 90 degrees. So there's lots of different ways to describe these angles. That would be, in the end, that would be called a right angle. And finally, an acute angle is less than 90 degrees. If it goes all the way around, that would be 330 degrees. And again, I'm just making a guess. What's the size of this angle from here to here? And I'm saying that that's 30 degrees. That means from here to here, that would be 60 degrees. So let's look at that in a little bit more detail. So if I take all of those rays, 1, 2, 3, 4 rays, and put them on a point and connect them with the longer ray, then we can talk about them turning through the coordinate plane. So this is a turn of, and if you might remember, that's 120 degrees. I'll label this in just a moment, but then another turn, and then a third turn, and a fourth turn. I left off the turn to the end, returning back to 0 degrees, but we'll look at that. So this is 0 degrees plus this turn, that's 120 degrees. That's the blue arrow, the blue arc, that would be called. 120 degrees plus 60 more degrees, that equals 180 degrees. So now we're here at 180 degrees. Now I'm going to add another 90 degrees to that 180 degrees. That's 270 degrees that we've turned. and I'm going to add 60 more degrees, so that ends up at 330 degrees to this point. And so a couple other words I mentioned, but we should think about these a little bit more, is what direction are you turning? So if you're going in the opposite way that a clock moves, that's called counterclockwise. So these are counterclockwise turns, but if you go in the direction that a clock moves, that would be called clockwise. So these are clockwise turns. We don't look at this kind of clock very much anymore because we use our phones or some other sort of digital device. So we look at digital clocks, and these are called analog clocks that have the hands that turn. So this would be clockwise. And finally, let's look at this smaller ray turning through this circle. So we start out at 0 degrees, and it begins to turn. And the first angle that we had was 120 degrees. So now that ray is going to continue to turn, and it gets to 180 degrees. Then it continues to turn, and it gets to 270 degrees. Turns some more, it turns another 60 degrees, and it gets to 330 degrees. And then if you turned another 30 degrees to the full circle, that's back to 0 degrees, or you could call that full turn 360 degrees. All right, so that's the first activity of the first lesson of 8th grade.